In 2004, Swedish journalist Stieg Larsson dies at age 50.
I think he was the most important activist in Sweden the last 30 years.
Expo magazine was incredibly important.
The reactions from the groups that we wrote about, the far-right activists, was very aggressive.
But it's a trilogy of unpublished novels he leaves behind that propel him to literary superstardom.
Everybody said the books will not sell so much. So we said, okay, Stieg is dead and the story is over.
No one can put Lisbeth Salander away. She is a magic creature. The books by Stieg Larsson have sold in more copies than the Bible.
The success of the books will plunge those closest to Larsson in a bitter feud over control of his estate and the Millennium millions.
I think this is sort of a contest of who loved Stieg the most. And who can you say that, who's the winner of that?
And leaves the world with one final question. Was there another book?
He had a manuscript for a fourth book. 2/3 of it was already finished.
November 9th, 2004. Writer and journalist Stieg Larsson arrives at the Stockholm offices of Expo, the magazine he founded in 1995. He feels ill and weak. A steady diet of coffee, cigarettes, and fast food are starting to take their toll. Daniel Poole is a former colleague of Larsson's at Expo.
Stieg wasn't the role model if you wanted to live a healthy life.
Investigative reporter Ali Fagan explored the case in his documentary The Millennium Millions.
He smoked a lot, drank a lot of coffee, didn't work out, and worked extreme amounts a day.
Larsson's chest pains grow more severe. His co-workers decide to rush him to the hospital. One of his colleagues collects Larsson's backpack off the floor, a random act that will prove meaningful in the months to come. Writer and architect Eva Gabrielsson, Larsson's girlfriend of 32 years, is away on business.
And she got this call, and they told her what happened, and she, of course, ran to the train station and on the way to the hospital.
He has a heart attack, and hospital staff spends the next 40 minutes trying to revive him. In vain. The 50-year-old Larsson is declared dead at 4:22 p.m. Larsson's hands are still warm when Gabrielsson wraps them in her own.
After losing your life companion, the person you have lived with for 30 years, shared everything with, if you lose this person, of course it's going to take you hard, and you're going to be in a deep shock and sorrow.
Larsson's father Erland and his brother Joachim arrive from the north of Sweden. Magdalena Hedlund will later serve as their agent.
They were in complete shock when your son and your brother has died. It's a natural reaction, I would say.
Stieg Larsson biographer Jan Erik Peterson.
There was a lot of grief, a lot of sorrow, and a lot of bewilderment among those who worked with him because they didn't know what would happen to Expo.
It didn't take a long time before we decided we have to show all the people out there that we can actually exist without Stieg, because that is what he wanted us to do.
Gabrielsson chooses the day the Nobel Prize is to be awarded as the day for Larsson's funeral. This way, the burial will go mostly unnoticed by enemies of Larsson's.
Stieg Larsson, he was quite famous as a journalist here in Sweden, writing about covering right-wing political extremism and the neo-Nazi movement.
Anna-Lena Lodenius collaborated with Larsson on a 1991 book exposing right-wing movements in Sweden.
We had a very special situation in Sweden at the end of the 80s, the beginning of the 90s, because you could see that the racism and xenophobia were growing a lot, and you had lots of people reacting on that.
While Gabrielsson is searching for mementos of her life with Larsson to share at the funeral, she comes across his 1977 will. In it, Larsson bequeaths all of his personal things and his writings to her.
She knew that there was a big heritage of Stieg Larsson, all his texts, all his political texts, all his books, and these new novels that was about to be published.
Larsson's wishes are clear, but the will isn't witnessed, and so it isn't valid. Eva learns from her lawyer that under Swedish law that's a problem, because Larsson and Gabrielsson aren't married.
There is a very weak protection for couples who are not married under the Swedish law.
Eva Gabrielsson and Stieg Larsson, they lived together for more than 3 decades, and they practically shared everything. She was also involved in his projects like Expo. She was very much involved in discussing with him, the details in the novels, the characters. Some of her knowledge as an architect you can find in some of the novels.
When Larsson dies, ownership of his estate is up in the air because Gabrielsson is not his next of kin. Kurt O'Baxey is Stieg Larsson's friend and colleague at Expo magazine.
Everybody said the books will not sell so much. So we said, okay, Stieg is dead and the story is over, but the story is not over.
What is going to happen? We were thinking at the time, because we did not know if the books were going to be able to be published.
The books in question are 3 novels Larsson completed in the years prior to his death. Novels featuring journalist Mikael Blomqvist, who, like Larsson, strives to expose Sweden's social and political injustices. Linda Altrov Berg is a literary agent for the Swedish publisher Norstedts.
When we got to know that he had passed away, we had already indications from the market in Sweden that this was going to be something huge.
A battle is brewing over control of Stieg Larsson's legacy, one that will divide those who loved him and tarnish the beliefs that Larsson held most dear.
She was very bitter.
There is a really nasty blackmailing story here.
Stieg Larsson and Eva Gabrielsson are lovers, colleagues, soulmates, but they are not married. When Larsson dies without a valid will in 2004, leaving a trilogy of soon-to-be-published books in his wake, Gabrielsson is left wondering who will control how the Millennium novels will be released to the world. Carl Stig Erland Larsson is born on August 15, 1954. His family moves to Stockholm when Larsson is 1, but the city's cramped living conditions force his parents to send him away to his grandparents, 500 miles north of Stockholm.
They left him to his maternal grandparents, who were living outside a small village called Bjursele. So one can say that Stieg lived right in the middle of nowhere.
Fredrik Quistberg co-produced the Millennium Millions with Ali Fagan.
The Larsson family was not poor, but they were sort of a middle-class, hard-working family from north of Sweden.
His grandfather was a leftist man, and also his mother was a social democrat, and I think they gave him a lot of values when he was a very little child.
According to girlfriend Eva Gabrielsson, this separation will mark Larsson's relationship with his family. 1963. Stieg returns to live with his parents after his grandfather Severin dies of a heart attack in his early 50s. The Larssons now live in Umeå in the north of Sweden, where the young Larsson becomes a voracious reader.
One of the things that intrigued him with science fiction was probably that it says something about the society today.
Stieg was brought up in a political family, in a family where you discussed, in a family where ideas were important.
He liked to write, and he got a typewriter when he was 12, I think, from his parents, so he sat there writing all the time.
And you have to remember that Stieg was a really nerd when it comes to crime novels.
The idea of creating Lisbeth Salander, I think, Stieg got from reading Astrid Lindgren's famous Pippi Longstocking about this anarchistic girl. And he was kind of thinking that when Pippi Longstocking would become like 21, 22 years old, she would be diagnosed with some brain disorder and put into an institution. And then she would come out and maybe be filled with revenge feelings and hatred against society.
Vivian Larsson, the mother of Stieg Larsson, was the first lady who started an equality community in the north of Sweden. And she had a big heart for everybody, and she died very early in her life.
This period is crucial in shaping Larsson's political views. Larsson grows restless and is eager to see more of the world. He relocates to Stockholm in the early 70s. Larsson meets political activist Eva Gabrielsson shortly thereafter.
They shared more or less everything, from politics, ideology, science fiction. They discussed everything every day, and they more or less worked together.
She was part of his projects, and she knew a lot about the things that he was writing about, and she was very interested in that.
Larsson begins his career as a journalist, writing and speaking about the rise of right-wing extremism in Sweden.
He was probably the foremost expert on right-wing political extremism in Sweden.
I don't think that Stieg Larsson made a self-portrait when he created the character Mikael Blomqvist, but there are of course similarities. Both are investigative journalists, and they have a strong drive, both of them, always trying to find out the truth, not afraid to dig in the sordid things in society.
It's actually risky to stand up for democracy. It's actually risky to say that you like the idea of a multicultural society. It's actually risky to say that you don't like racism.
Larsson is placed on a neo-Nazi list of dangerous journalists whose careers should be cut short.
We know for a fact that he received a lot of threats from neo-Nazis. I have myself heard sound recordings from his telephone, people threatening him to death.
It was the result of a political movement and the ideas in that political movement, which is about the right to kill people that you don't agree with, the right to kill people that are not allowed to be a part of your society or the society that you dream of.
Despite the death threats, Gabrielsson remains by Larsson's side. In fact, they are inseparable, but they decide not to marry.
They were, in one sense, one person, doing things together and discussing and thinking about different projects and so on. So they were kind of, they belonged to each other in a very clear way and a very beautiful way from what I saw.
They could easily have been getting married, but as many people in the leftist movement, and they would say that it's not important to be married. It's an old-fashioned way of being together and all that.
There is another reason that prevents the two from marrying. Martin Schultz is a law professor at Stockholm University.
One of the reasons they never got married is because of the work Stieg Larsson was doing, especially on the extreme right-wing movement.
If they would have gotten married, some of the contacts, details of their addresses and things like this would go public. That's how the registers work here in Sweden.
He didn't want to risk Eva's being dragged into that world, basically.
Keeping things private is Stieg's way of keeping Eva safe. Decades later, the decision not to marry will come back to haunt Gabrielsson. She spends the first half of 2005 trying to establish her legal entitlement to Stieg Larsson's estate. Larsson's father, Erland, and brother Joachim, who are initially supportive of her efforts, are now increasingly hard to reach.
She, of course, contacted the publishing house and asked what was going on. And first, I think she thought that she had the rights to be involved in the process of publish these books.
But a letter from the Swedish Tax Bureau confirms her very worst fears. She is to inherit nothing. Larsson's father and brother are the legal heirs to the estate, and immediately begin discussions with Norstedts on how to release the Millennium books. the books Larsson had been working on up until his death.
When the Swedish law finally decided that the estate, the father and the brother, should have the legal inheritance, we had to start talking to them about things that had to do with Stieg's affairs.
Eva, in that situation, it was very hard for her. First, she lost her life partner, and then she lost control over everything they worked with together.
Legally, there are no question marks at all in this case. Joachim and Erland Larsson inherited Stieg because there was no will between Stieg and Eva.
When the Larssons realized that they were, to inherit all these rights, they were also very surprised. They didn't know at first how they should handle all this.
Larsson's writings include not only the Millennium books, but a vast collection of articles and several non-fiction books about Sweden's tumultuous political climate.
Stieg Larsson, he wrote several books on the subject of right-wing extremism. One was called Extremhögern, probably one of the most in-depth reportage books on the subject.
We decided that we should make some kind of investigation and telling who are they and what the groups are operating and who's back of them.
Sweden Democrats is a nationalistic party with roots into back in the neo-Nazi movement. They're in the parliament. Their only focus is basically issues of immigration, and nowadays they're also very much focusing on the question of Islam in Sweden.
The book, released in 1991, raises the ire of the neo-Nazi party's staunchest supporters.
And during that time you could see race of xenophobia and racism in Sweden, and particularly many Nazi groups.
He dedicated his life to the anti-racist cause. And one thing that made him so special, I think that differs him from most other journalists, that he really took a debate with the right-wing people.
So I think he was the most important activist in Sweden the last 30 years.
Larsson co-founds the Swedish Expo Foundation in 1995 to counteract the growth of the extreme right and white power culture. He also becomes editor of Expo magazine.
Expo magazine was incredibly important, and he knew that they had Searchlight in Great Britain, they had like Monitor in Norway and Demos in Denmark, and he was a friend of all those people, and he wanted to do something similar in Sweden. So he talked a long time before he started Expo magazine that he would do something like this in Sweden.
We had a large group of young journalists and reporters who wanted to work for Expo, but there wasn't money enough to give a salary.
I've asked some of the persons who have worked with him, and they say that, well, maybe Millennium is some kind of idealized Expo. It's the Expo that Stieg would have wanted and loved, because it's got a much higher circulation, it's got much bigger resources than Expo and so forth.
There was Stieg, he was the eldest person in this group, and a few guys and two girls. And I believe today that these two girls, they gave also their character and their clothes and their tattoo to the character of Lisbeth Salander. Without these girls at the Expo, we would never have this Lisbeth Salander as we have today.
The reactions from the groups that we wrote about, the far-right activists, was very aggressive. They weren't used to getting reported about. They were used to living in the shadows, basically. So the reaction was to try to stop the magazine. He actually was there almost all the time, almost all his spare time. So even if it was a very small magazine, even if we had financial problems, he gave all his time for this magazine.
Starting in 1997, Larsson spends his evenings and weekends working on a new type of book, a fictional tale whose themes of violence against women are inspired by an event he witnessed when he was a teenager. It's a traumatic event that eventually leads to the creation of one of the most famous literary characters of the 21st century.
Two of his friends, they raped a little girl, and Stieg didn't do anything to help to this little girl.
Stieg Larsson dies and leaves an immense body of work that includes 3 unpublished novels. Some say he loosely bases Millennium's Mikael Blomkvist, the book's crusading journalist, on himself, while Lisbeth Salander takes the shape of a ghost from Larsson's past.
In the summer of 1969, Stieg Larsson and 2 friends went to a camping house, and 2 of his friends, they raped a little girl, and Stieg didn't do anything to help to this little girl. And when Stieg came home, he felt very bad and he could not sleep.
The girl's name is Lisbeth. The rape would forever mark the author, who vowed never to let such acts go unpunished, at least not in his novels.
And now Stieg has written over 2,000 pages, 25, 30 years later, just an answer maybe to this little girl in the north of Sweden. So this is the story.
Larsson begins writing the Millennium saga in 1997.
When he was working at Expo, his colleagues used to see him sit and, grin with a smile on his face. And that was when he was actually, instead of writing things to publish in Expo, he was actually working on his novels, because he was so passionate about it.
His main project was to finish those 3 books, and he wrote them at the same time. And before he even went to the publishing company, he had these 3 books.
He had a way of writing, a way of expressing himself, which you, by the way, can see in the books. I remember the first time I read the books, I could almost hear Stieg's voice, basically, because he was this very Stiegish way of writing.
And he was very interested in crime novels that tries to tell something about problems in the society and the political situation. So when I learned that he actually tried to make these kind of books himself, I was not surprised.
The themes in the book, for example, violence against women, is a part of what Stieg always talked about, but that he couldn't write in Expo because Expo was kind of isolated to confronting organized intolerance.
He was not expecting all these success. All these things to be famous, and this book would sell so much. He said me he wanted to sell about 1 million copies in Scandinavia and Germany. That was his dream, It was the biggest dream he had.
Some people, have a garden. Some people watch football, and he writes crime novels.
In the fall of 2003, Gabrielsson returns home with a copy of the manuscript for The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. It has been returned to sender from one of Sweden's largest publishers. But Gabrielsson isn't going to take no for an answer.
Well, Eva Gabrielsson, she has always been a tough person.
Weeks later, the pristine manuscript is sent back to Larsson. In fact, it's too pristine.
They received the first manuscript of the first book, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, but they actually never read it.
A friend of Larsson's with connections to Swedish publishers offers to pitch the novel to Norstedts. The reaction from the company is immediate.
We at Norstedts were so thrilled when Stieg came to us with his 3 wonderful manuscripts, and we started to make plans together with him, both for publishing his books and selling them, rights for translation as well as film rights.
Stieg wanted to use the money that he got from the books to secure the magazine Expo. And he also wanted to get money for different anti-racist activities. That was part of the goal.
So normally when an author comes to a publishing house, they have 1 script, hopefully 1 script. And in this case, we had like 3. 2 entire scripts and a 3rd one almost done. And our plan was to publish 1 every year.
Norstedts gives Larsson an advance against future royalties on the 3 books of 591,000 Swedish krona, or $88,000 US. He and Gabrielsson agree to use the money to pay off their mortgage and slowly begin to make plans on how to use future payments, including donating royalties from a 4th book to Expo magazine.
Stieg Larsson had plans on writing 10 books about Lisbeth Salander and these characters.
Stieg was very excited when the books were accepted by Norstedts because he really wanted to become a successful and good and established crime writer on the same level as the well-known Swedish crime writers like Henning Mankell.
He said that, well, except from buying a house outside Stockholm, I will use this money as a platform to spread my ideas, not have to care about what people think of what I'm writing, not have to be scared of losing my job.
Publisher Norstedts chooses the Frankfurt Book Fair, the biggest such fair in the world, as an opportunity to sell the international rights to the books.
And it turned out that there was a lot of interest, and international publishers queued before the Norstedts stand to get reading copies.
We thought that there was so much time with Stieg, but there wasn't.
But by May of 2005, Eva Gabrielsson, Larsson's longtime companion, learns that Joachim and Erland Larsson are the rightful heirs to her late partner's estate, including his unpublished novels. She believes that they are unworthy of managing his legacy and claims that Larsson's relationship to his brother and father was tenuous at best.
It stood quite clear that they weren't that close. I mean, Joachim Larsson, when I asked him, when did you meet your brother last time? He couldn't answer first. And then he said about 2 years before he died. That was the last time they met.
When I was getting a ticket to go to Umeå, he told me, you have to visit my father, because I haven't visited him, which is a very strange thing to do. But he asked me to visit him, and just to pop by and say hi. And I did.
Every time I visited his town, Umeå, he asked me to have a lunch with his father. And he always called his father for Erland, not father, as we say in my mother language, Kurdish. And I was very angry to him, how he can say Erland to his father.
They live in different parts of Sweden. They could, I think, have a closer contact. But, you know, Stieg Larsson was a very political person, and he was very concerned in politics. He didn't share this interest with his brother that much as he shared it with Eva Gabrielsson. That's obvious.
Magdalena Hedlund does not agree.
The relationship Stieg had with his father and with his brother, it seems to me as it was a perfectly normal relationship. They lived far away from each other, but they had contact on the phone and by email, and they saw each other every now and then.
She thinks that she is the one who knew Stieg, and that's the reason why she wants to have control over his writings.
I think this is sort of a contest of who loved Stieg the most. And who can you say that, who's the winner of that?
The memories of those days are far from Gabrielsson's mind upon learning that Joachim and Erland Larsson will inherit the entirety of Stieg Larsson's estate, and they have very different ideas about how it should be managed. It will soon create a divide between Gabrielsson and the Larssons, and things are about to get ugly.
It's really one of the worst deals in the film history, I think, for a success script like the Millennium trilogy.
She was never interested in the money. She was only interested in the heritage of Stieg Larsson, her life companion.
Eva Gabrielsson claims that her lover and life partner, writer Stieg Larsson, was never close to his brother Joachim and his father Erland, and that only she has the right to manage his estate. As the release of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo grows near, the publisher Norstedts and the new heirs of the estate revisit Larsson's unsigned publishing deal. New negotiations are begun, negotiations that to some are to the Larsson family's disadvantage.
If Eva Gabrielsson would have had the rights to the novels and to all Stieg Larsson's texts, it would have been much trickier for Norstedts, the publishing house, to make new deals. Had to write new contracts, this time with the legal heirs, Joachim and Erland Larsson. And we actually got hold of these new contracts and showed them to some experts, and most people told us that these were lousy. I mean, having the fact that this was an international success, these were lousy contracts.
That, of course, was very convenient for Norstedts. Here they have two, older guys from northern Sweden that didn't know anything. Of course, that was much easier to deal with than this Eva Gabrielsson, who was really a fighter.
Neither the Larssons nor Norstedts revealed the exact dollar amounts. But according to Ali Fagan and Fredrik Quistberg, it's clear that the publisher makes the most of the Larssons' lack of knowledge of the publishing world.
If it would have been Eva Gabrielsson they would have to negotiate with, it would have been a completely different affair.
For the publisher Norstedts, it's an opportunity to build a franchise.
The first book had come out, and it was already a big hit. And everybody was expecting the second book, and everybody knew there were 3 books, a trilogy. But, I mean, it all exploded.
Gabrielsson disapproves of the English title of the first book, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and will write in her autobiography that the late author preferred the more literal translation, Men Who Hate Women. She suggests that the characters and events portrayed in the Millennium books are based on her life experiences with Larsson, and teases that while she didn't necessarily ghostwrite the books, she and Larsson did often write together.
In some situations, you could have a special case for compensation, and that would be if Eva would have been seen as an author of some of his works. It's very difficult to bring proof on that afterwards, that it was in fact a collaborative effort.
It wasn't easy for her to find herself so put aside from everything that they had shared together. So I think she started to fight to get these rights back.
Even though she's at risk of losing her home, Gabrielsson's true motive appears to be neither the money nor the Millennium books themselves.
The big thing for her was not the 3 novels. This was a hobby project for Stieg Larsson and for her also in a sense. The real concern for her was the political text, the books that he had written about the right-wing movements here in Sweden, all the texts that he had been written.
Gabrielsson believes that Larsson's 4 non-fiction books on Sweden's extreme right movement and the countless magazine articles he wrote are just as important a commodity as the Millennium books. If not financially, then at the very least intellectually. She wants control over all of his work, both fiction and non-fiction.
I don't think Eva Gabrielsson is a gold digger. She made a proposal to Joachim and Alan Larsson that they should be given all the money from the Millennium trilogy. She just wanted to have the control over the books. She wanted that control, she explained to us, because she didn't want to see Stieg's works too commercialized.
Ali Fagan explains the finer points of Gabrielsson's proposal.
They actually said that if you want, you can put in how many % of the income from the books that you want Eva Gabrielsson to have. And they said that if you put 0, it's 0. If you put 50, it's 50. But so they could actually fill in the amount of money. If they didn't want to give her any money, they could have written 0.
But the Larssons refuse her proposal. Meanwhile, the first book is beginning to make waves all around the world.
Not only in Sweden, not only in Norway, in Denmark, in Germany, in France, in Spain, in Italy, they saw it everywhere. And when the books were launched in USA, Canada, UK, that's when the explosion came through with readers. It was immense.
This is kind of book that you would take it up and then you wouldn't put it down. I mean, this is what makes a success. But I could not have realized how big. I mean, this is huge, worldwide.
The book is a hot topic of discussion.
I think every publisher and every reader, in fact, has his or her idea of what they think is the magic in the books. No one can put Lisbeth Salander away. She is a magic creature. before Stieg, no one had described a female main character who wasn't afraid of anything, who had this strength, who had had a tough life, but who stood up and had strong ideas and ideals.
I think the Millennium books are not really great literature, but they are really great crime writing.
Well, the popularity of his books didn't mean that much for Expo, surprisingly enough. My idea was that, now his books is famous all over the world, which means that we will have, a lot of people subscribe to the magazine, a lot of people giving us money and, supporting us. But no.
Linda Altrov Berg recalls Norstedt's initial pact with the author.
So when Norstedt signed Stieg Larsson, our promise to him was, of course, to sell as many books as possible in Sweden, first of all, but also to sell the rights for translation in as many countries as possible. Plus, we also had this agreement to sell his film rights.
Not so, writes Eva Gabrielsson in her book. She claims that Larsson owned the film rights and had been holding out for a Hollywood adaptation when he died. Nevertheless, Norstedts orchestrates a deal for the Larssons in which the 3 books will be turned into 6 movies for Swedish television, then released worldwide as a trilogy of theatrical films.
The deal that Alan and Joachim closed, it's a very crappy deal. It's really one of the worst deals in the film history, I think, for a success script like the Millennium trilogy.
Neither Norstedts nor the Larssons divulge any details. When Gabrielsson makes a plea to the Larssons for editorial control over the films, they tell her in no uncertain terms that she will not have any. Further proof for her that the Larssons are building a commercial empire out of her late partner's legacy, which goes completely against what Stieg would have wanted.
It would have been completely understandable if she was interested in the money, because it's huge amounts of money. But she was never interested in the money. She was only interested in the heritage of Stieg Larsson, her life companion.
October 2005. After months of legal squabbling, Gabrielsson learns she has no claim to the late author's estate. She will lose everything, including her apartment, unless she fulfills one important request.
He had a manuscript for a 4th book. 2/3 of it was already finished.
A file on the laptop computer recovered from the Expo offices on the day Larsson died becomes a huge bargaining chip. Could Eva Gabrielsson be in possession of a 4th Millennium book?
This is a commercial dynamite.
Eva Gabrielsson learns that she will have no say over the legacy of her late partner, author Stieg Larsson. She watches in horror as the estate's legal heirs, her de facto in-laws Joachim and Erland Larsson, are given full control over how to release and possibly exploit 3 of the most popular novels in the 21st century. But could there be one more? On the day he died, Stieg Larsson carried with him not only a dying heart, but a heavy laptop computer as well. The computer, property of Expo magazine, contained an unfinished novel.
He had a manuscript for a 4th book. 2/3 of it was already finished. And this was all in his working laptop that he used when he was working for Expo.
There has been, of course, a lot of rumors, and people are claiming that there are so and so many pages written, 150 pages, 300 pages, and so forth.
Upon leaving Expo, one of the magazine's staff members takes the backpack containing Stieg's laptop with her. It's practically an afterthought.
This is a commercial dynamite. After all this success, there is a 4th manuscript already almost written, clear, finished. So, of course, Alan and Joachim Larsson, who actually has the legal rights for this, what is written in this computer, they tried to get a hold of this computer.
What happens to the computer in the days and weeks following Stieg Larsson's death is unclear. Expo releases a statement saying they are unaware of its whereabouts, while Gabrielsson teases that she knows where it is. without admitting that it's in her possession.
Joachim and Alan Larsson, they actually own half of the apartment that Stieg and Eva were living in. So what they did was that they said that if you don't give us the computer back, we will make you thrown out of the apartment. So I think she took that very, very hard.
But the fourth Millennium manuscript is Gabrielsson's ace in the hole, and she isn't giving it up without a fight.
There is a really nasty blackmailing story here.
In December 2005, Joachim threatens Gabrielsson's lawyer that Norstedts will cancel the publishing of the second and third novels in the series unless Gabrielsson delivers the computer to them. Norstedts, however, say they know nothing about the existence of a fourth book.
As far as Norstedts and I'm concerned, we have never seen a fourth manuscript. We have read about it in papers, we have heard people talk about them in TV shows, but we have never seen not even a glimpse of it. So rumors, as far as it comes to us, are rumors.
I know very little about the fourth book. What I know, I have basically read in the papers, lots of speculations. Joachim and Erland do not know where the manuscript is. I don't know if Eva knows where it is.
The Larssons' threats prove baseless as Norstedts releases the second and third books in 2006 and 2007. Like the first novel, they are huge bestsellers. Mysteriously, the fight over the fourth book is dropped entirely, and no explanation is ever given.
In 2008, Eva Gabrielsson and Erland and Joachim issued some kind of statement that the book was not going to be published. As far as I know, this is how it stands right now.
For people loving Millennium, it's a shame that it hasn't been published. But the question is, who would finish it?
In a way, I think that maybe it's good enough. Why longing for a fourth book? I think 3 books might be enough.
Of this great work of Stieg Larsson, what has come out? A bitter conflict. Who would have wanted that? The least person that wanted that would be Stieg Larsson himself.
Stieg Larsson was a very idealistic person, and he didn't care about money. And to see this process about money afterwards, I think it's very sad in many ways.
However, there is no denying the success of the Millennium trilogy in its first 7 years.
The 3 books by Stieg Larsson have sold in approximately 65 million copies worldwide. You are in Sweden, and in Sweden we are 9.5 million inhabitants. We have sold close to 3.5 million copies of all 3 books.
Well, I think it's important for Joachim and Erland to handle the rights in a respectful way and to try to think what they think Stieg would have wanted to do and to manage it as well as possible. But of course they would have been happier if it could have been done in cooperation also with Eva.
I want to mention Denmark, which is a small country. The publisher says that the books by Stieg Larsson have sold in more copies than the Bible. I do not know how she had counted it, but I'm sure she's right. It's amazing. It's totally like cuckoo. How could it happen?
Gabrielsson's continued attempts to obtain the rights to Stieg Larsson's work are met with the same answer each time. No.
The fight and the media publicity over the money is maybe one of the saddest things about the success of his books. And I would guess that Stieg would be the one who hated the situation most of everyone.
At first, I think that a lot of people felt compassion to Eva Gabrielsson's story, and the media picture of the Larssons family was that they were very greedy.
Well, I would say initially they have kind of suffered in silence. They have responded to some of the journalists' questions, but they have also felt for a long time that that the journalists weren't really interested in reporting what they had to say.
Then, in the fall of 2007, something unexpected happens. The Larssons give their share of the apartment to Gabrielsson. Skeptics believe the Larssons are bowing to public pressure.
The Swedish media had a very fixed picture of who the bad guy was in this story and who the good guy was.
The Larssons' apparent goodwill doesn't end there.
On one occasion, Erland and Joachim were offering 20 million kronor to Eva Gabrielsson.
The Larssons' offer also includes one of the 3 seats on the board which manages the Larsson estate. But further inquiries reveal that Gabrielsson's power would be limited to accessing contracts and financial statements. Full control over the estate would remain with the Larssons.
She didn't want to have that. She said she didn't want to be bought by this money.
Because this is not a question about the money, it's a question about who has the control over the legacy of Stieg Larsson.
In April 2010, Gabrielsson's lawyer asks the Larssons for control over the author's political writings only. 2 months later, the Larssons announce that they wish to permanently stop all negotiations.
There's like a canyon between them.
She has wanted to handle the rights on her own and to be the one who has the saying about what should be done and not. And there the discussion have ended. So.
2011, Gabrielsson releases a book of her own, an autobiography. In it, she makes inflammatory accusations against the Larssons and how they handled the estate.
This was her way, I think. I do not know her. This was her way of answering a lot of questions to a lot of people at the same time.
In it, she suggests her life with Larsson inspired the characters and events in the Millennium universe, and speaks out against what she considers outdated Swedish laws that prevent common law partners from enjoying the same rights as married couples. She also suggests that she knew Stieg Larsson better than anyone, including his own family.
I think that Joachim was upset when reading Eva Gabrielsson's book, partly because it contains things that are not true, and partly it very much gives the impression that Stieg should not have had any contact with his father and brother.
The Larssons take to the internet to challenge some of Gabrielsson's accusations. The website and further interviews appear to improve the Larssons' public image.
I think people then started realizing that the situation wasn't as easy as it had been pictured before.
Internationally, we know for a fact that Eva Gabrielsson has a lot of support. But here, I think that people think that, well, they had the legal rights. What could they do? This is not a legal question, it's a moral question.
In 7 short years, the Millennium books have sold more than 65 million copies and spawned a successful trilogy of Swedish films, as well as an American remake.
Some of the money that nowadays comes to Stieg's brother and his father actually are given back to Expo, a very small part of the money though. It's 2 million Swedish crowns a year, which makes it possible for us to have like 4 or 5 people hired, which is very important. I mean, we're very thankful for that.
In 2008, publisher Norstedts and the Larssons established the Stieg Larsson Prize, which is awarded to a person or an organization working against racism and oppression. But the ending of Stieg's story is far more ironic than that of any book or movie.
Joachim and Erland Larsson, they are in a tricky situation also, because I mean they're probably one of the wealthiest people in north of Sweden. If they started to flash with this money and buy villas and cars, and people would probably be annoyed and point fingers at them and say, look at the greedy Larsson family.
Naturally, they are sad that he was never able to experience this the success that he had on his own.
The Larssons are at a moral impasse.
I don't think that they can actually use all this money before they solve the situation with Eva Gabrielsson. How that is going to happen, I don't know. But until then, all these Millennium millions, they're still on a bank account somewhere.
Stieg Larsson was a fighter and would have no doubt used his international fame to keep fighting. But his death raises the question, had he lived to see his success? How many more books did he have in him? And more important to Stieg himself, how much more might his pleas for tolerance have resonated around the world?